why is a conference organized around this title necessary or even interesting? I mean, Don always wins. You know, throughout history, Thomas Malthus, Dead Blood, the Club of Rome, vaccine panics, endocrine disruption, peak oil, one after another. Dawn has always come, and the prophets have been proven wrong. But then, of course, there's the well-known phenomenon that doom always sells. You're here, after all. There are those in the Ehrlichs and the Rifkins and others have proven you can live a lifetime of unbroken error, predicting disaster, and without apparently personal or professional embarrassment. The next book will sell more than the last one did. So we all love that little free song of down the spine, that comes at the latest disaster flick or novel. But to be a little less flip, history is not destiny, and in fact it's a series of discontinuities. And there's no guarantee that just because previous discontinuities have resulted in the ascent of humankind that all future ones will. And I think there's every reason to wonder whether the nature, the speed, and the scale of today's breakthrough technologies might not lead to a very different outcome. And certainly the speed and the nature of those scientific improvements commands us to caution and open-mindedness. On this campus, so much of this is happening. We're manipulating matter at a level we couldn't even detect not that long ago. People are preparing to edit the basic code of life. Our keynoter last year, James Barrett, came to talk to us about the very real prospect, people really only debating when, not if, software becomes self-improving with the possibility of creating a species, if that's what it will call itself, more intelligent than our own. So lots and lots of open questions, lots of reasons to feel that familiar and ever welcome chill. Purdue, I think, is a natural home for such a conversation. Of course, we're giving birth on this campus to many of the very technologies that will be discussed over these next few hours. Life-saving, life-enhancing technologies of all kinds. But we also here believe in following the facts and in reverence for truth, a willingness to question our own convictions as well as those of others, a preference for facts over dogma. And so we know we are in this room, and in the rooms of tomorrow we will be joined by many, many guests who share our passion for these pursuits. And I want to say to each of you, not just our lead speakers, of whom we're about to welcome, an especially eminent one, but everyone who's here to take part. Thank you for your interest in this subject, your zest for a good debate. We're honored to have each of you here, and hope that you'll find the time between now and midday tomorrow edifying and interesting. I want to bring to you now your host and MC, Gerry McCartney, our head of IT, a tremendous force for inquiry on this campus, for not just what he brings in terms of making all the rest of us efficient, but his own contributions to thought and progress here. And it's Gerry who grabbed the ball and ran with it with this concept last year. Once again this year has brought us all together and assembled a fantastic program. So with thanks for all you've done, Dr. Gerry McCartney.
Thank you, Mitch. It's actually Mitch's fault we're doing this. He wrote a book at Christmas of 2014. I think you just mentioned James Barrett's book, Our Final Invention, that led directly to the first Dawn or Doom event this time last year. We examined and discussed robotics and artificial intelligence, the dread of an event horizon, and what that might mean for humanity. This year we've drawn it in a little bit. We've decided to focus on privacy, security, technology policy, manufacturing, and yes, living on other planets. What do all these technology changes mean for us? There's a lot of informed debate. But one thing we know is that smart people can easily interpret the same events in different ways. This morning, in the Q&A part of his keynote, Steve Law noted the movie Her as a dawn narrative about robotics. For me, it was quite literally the scariest movie I've seen in years, and an utter doom scenario. But this is exactly what makes this set of topics so interesting. I can borrow this quote from Robert Kennedy. All of us might wish at times that we lived in a more tranquil world, but we don't. And if our times are difficult and perplexing, so are they challenging and filled with opportunity. In any event, we're delighted as a land-grant institution committed to the liberal and practical education of our people to be able to offer this event completely free to our students and citizens alike. And this, thanks to the support of our corporate friends at EMC, Cisco, and Hewlett-Packard. So this evening, we finish our first day by welcoming to Purdue Bart Gellman. Mr. Gellman is a senior fellow at the Century Foundation and lecturer and author-in-residence at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning political journalist who a decade ago probably never imagined himself being the keynote speaker at a technology conference. But in 2012, politics and technology collided in a big way when a contractor working for the National Security Agency, Edward Snowden, leaked classified information about US and European government surveillance, which was being done with the cooperation of telecommunications corporations. Now, 3 years after Snowden first contacted him, Bart Gellman offers us a fresh account of the disclosures and their aftershocks. Mr. Gellman will help us understand the legal, political, and technological battle being waged to define the boundaries of electronic privacy. Please silence your electronic devices, but don't put them away. We want to see you tweeting to the hashtag Dawn or Doom. Bart is happy to take questions at the end of this presentation, so I'll ask you now to start thinking about the questions you want to ask him. But first, please join me in welcoming Mr. Bart Gellman.
Either my father or I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I will invite you to let that other shoe drop, as Gerry just said, during the Q&A. I'm not that fragile, so this is my first visit to Purdue, but not my first encounter with your computer science department. I don't know that many of you can say this. I first spoke to Professor Spafford more than 25 years ago. It was 1988. I was a summer intern at the Washington Post, and as you can see, I was about 12 years old. Somebody in the newsroom found out about this thing called the Internet. And 500,000 people on there, what were they up to? Well, let's just assign the intern to that one. Somehow I found out what it was about, and he told me one of the most distinctive and interesting things about the Internet, which is no advertising. Just trying to post an ad on the Internet said, you'll be sorry. There it is right there from the story. And that was then, and this is now. But enough about me. Let's talk about me and Edward Snowden. And this is actually a subject on which Professor Spacker and I may disagree, judging from the tenor of some of his tweets back in the early days of this story. And again, I think that's good. If we all agree on up here, it's boring. I'll start from the beginning, which was 2.5 years ago. I think it was 2013. The filmmaker Laura Poitras put me in touch with a spooky source who claimed to have a big scoop. He called himself Vuex, Latin for truth or truth teller. He gave me a cover name too, Brass Banner. Sounds sort of like Bruce Banner without the Hulk part. Now, I have a pretty high bar for extraordinary anonymous claims. You get a lot of them, mostly about aliens or mind-reading aliens. The odds were pretty good that this one was going to flake out as well. But I was intrigued enough to give him a hearing. Now, I say him, but at the time I had no idea. This slide is an artist's conception of our early talks, but in real life I actually couldn't see his hands. I saw words on screen. I didn't know who wrote them, where he worked, or what he really knew. It would be months before I went and met him in Moscow, or even heard his voice. But I could talk to him. So after 9/11, I taught myself the tools of digital self-defense. It had become harder to do national security reporting the old way, harder to keep notes and sources confidential. Many of you in the room will recognize this as a small screen of fake PGP encryption, which is the standard for keeping the contents of an email confidential. If you have the key, then you can open it. And this was from one of his earliest, actually, it was part of his first message to me. I learned about Tor for anonymity and PGP and encrypted chat on Jabber, and without those tools, Snowden and I could not have spoken at all. He simply wouldn't have been able to reach out to me. I found it extraordinary that they seemed to work as well as they did. Snowden was living out this old cypherpunk dream from the 1990s, talking privately about the world's most proficient surveillance agency without being himself surveilled. The more we talked, the more persuaded I became that he was for real. Eventually I learned that Snowden worked at NSA Hawaii as a booze Allen contractor. This is the Cunha Regional SIGINT Operations Center, or RSOC. Motto is the silent sentinels, though in this case, not so much silent. The RSOC is a World War II underground bunker. It's huge. You enter it over here and go quite a long way underground, end up in an office somewhere underground, or in Snowden's case, somewhere right around here. Snowden had a lot to say to me about what he learned on the job. After a while, he began to pass documents as well. Now, when insiders talk to a journalist about things like that, we usually call it a leak. I don't actually love the metaphor, but journalists do like leaks. The more the better. People who work in the national security field often feel otherwise. And the Secretary of Defense once gave me this cup with the motto on it, and I took that as a friendly gesture. So the metaphor of the leak seems actually insufficient in this case. And the scale and the sensitivity of the Snowden disclosures was unique to journalistic history. I found myself in possession of thousands of documents marked with scary-looking stamps. Some of them I believed to be of significant public interest. By the way, I was supposed to give you this animation of the leak, the big leak, there it is, from Snowden. Others of these documents had information that I did not believe should be published. Snowden asked me to make those calls myself. Now, if you're not inside the classified world, though it's possible some of you here are, then the terms, I've had people come up to me afterward. I gave one talk at another university, which shall not be named here, and the fellow came up to me afterward and said that he was the deputy chief of the NSA's Media Leaks Task Force. So the terminology can be opaque if you're an outsider. The NSA, the lowest level of classification is confidential. Snowden's NSA documents were not that. I don't even know whether the NSA has that stamp. Nor were most of them marked merely secret. The WikiLeaks diplomatic cables, by contrast, had nothing in them that was higher than secret. Next level up is top secret. Some of the Snowden material was that, most of it was still higher. It was called sensitive compartmented information, or SCI, full of caveats and compartment names and special handling procedures. In this case, top secret, special intelligence, WorkCon means the originating office that creates the document has control of where and whether and when it's shared elsewhere. It's about communications intelligence and to be shared only with what's known as the Five Eyes, meaning US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. I did not want to be Bart Gellman, freelance guy, on a story like this. I called an old friend at home one night, who was a senior editor at the Washington Post. And I said, get me a meeting with your boss, please, right away. Why? He asked, perfectly reasonable question. Can't say. Well, just the general subject, he said. Can't tell you that either. Let's be serious. I'm going to look like an idiot, he tells me, and I say, sorry, but please tell him we can't meet in his office, and he shouldn't bring his phone, but he should bring the lawyers. So the rest of the answer was unprintable. Now, I grew up professionally at the Washington Post, but I had left there in 2010. There was a new executive editor who'd arrived since I left. His name was Marty Barron. He didn't know me from Adam. This is Marty, and this is Liam Neeson. Liam is playing Marty in a newsroom movie that's coming out soon. Marty deserves it. He turned out to be, in my view, a real hero of journalism. So now, 2 days later, I'm telling this guy, I have a spooky national security source. I'm not going to tell him who it is. He's given me documents. I'm not going to tell him how many. They're classified higher than anything that the paper has ever possessed. I believe them to be authentic, but verification is going to be very difficult. I'm not feeling a whole lot of love from the room. There's more. We're going to burn a lot of lawyer time, and I'm going to need you to pay those bills. You obviously have final say in what gets published, but I can veto any detail that I believe to be too dangerous and keep things out of the paper. You'll need to set up a secure room to work with the material, no windows, safe, video monitoring, encrypted air-gapped computers, GPG keys. Don't worry, I said, I brought a list. Now, even to my ears, it was starting to sound absurd. My friend, I sense, is beginning to regret the introduction. And I have one additional specific request that I can't talk about here without waiving legal privilege, but it was a hard one. Now, for the first time, a partner from Williams & Connolly, big Washington law firm, speaks up. He says, as the company's lawyer, Marty, I can't advise you to do that. And Marty takes about 2 seconds to think about it, and he says, I'm doing it. And then he says to me something like, where do we start? Now, I'll come back to why the lawyer spoke up, but for now, I'll just mention 18 U.S.C. 798. It's a section of the United States Code that's part of the Espionage Act. Publication explicitly is listed in this section. The Post had taken on this risk before, and so had I, when we thought it important enough. But there had never been a story quite like this. The vital public interest here, as we saw it, was not that the NSA was doing secret things overseas. We expected that. We did not expect that the NSA and other agencies were collecting so much at home or from Americans overseas. And the citizens, the voters, were not being told the truth. So, as I see it, and I think the way the paper saw it, we had a fairly fundamental conflict, as we often do, between two vital principles, both of them enshrined in the Constitution or in the very design of the document, which is we govern ourselves and we have to defend ourselves. And sometimes, if you tell the people what's going on, the bad guys are going to hear it too, and that's a problem. But if you don't tell the people, then you're asking them to give complete faith without accountability to the people who run the government to act on their behalf. Here's another way to say it. There have to be trade-offs. Here's what JFK did not say in his famous speech. He did not say that there's no price worth paying. He did not say that we'll take only the good stuff for free. If you accept twin goals, you have to accept that there are trade-offs, that you do have to pay a price sometimes. Sometimes you do keep a secret, even if that reduces accountability. Sometimes you make a disclosure, even if it could make things harder for law enforcement or intelligence gathering. So here's how it actually worked. You've probably seen this clip by now. It's Ron Wyden, Senator Ron Wyden on the Intelligence Committee, talking to, now I gotta figure out where my cursor is, right, talking to the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. It's a very short clip, and I went the wrong way. Let's see if I can get there.
NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
So you can see the senator is fairly incredulous at that answer because he does also get the classified briefings, and he knew what the answer was. And in fact, he had sent a heads up to Director Clapper's staff 2 days earlier saying, I'm going to ask you this question in the public hearing. Clapper had some explaining to do after the first Snowden stories appeared. And here he is on MSNBC someday.
I responded in what I thought was the most truthful or least untruthful manner by saying no.
So, what can you mean by least untruthful answer? He clearly does not mean it literally. The truth is more truthful than the answer he gave. But Clapper's not a fool, and he's not a bad man, and he's not ill-intended. What he means here, I think, is the least untruthful answer that lets him do his job as he thinks necessary. Now, there's an old philosophy behind this. Churchill, as usual, put the point quite colorfully. He said that in wartime, truth is so precious that it should be attended by a bodyguard of lies. That wartime secrets are held on our behalf, and the government does what's necessary to protect us. I think a lot of intelligence officials hold that view sincerely, but it is certainly not a view that journalists or, I think, citizens should accept. And the thing is, this philosophy is put into practice very often. There are a lot of examples I could give you, but here's one. These are examples about what the government says about its use of the secret powers that it assumed after 9/11. In 2009, Congress compelled the Justice Department, which had resisted, to give a public answer. How many times had it used a provision of the Patriot Act called Section 215? Section 215 allowed the FBI to issue secret orders for business records. So in all of 2009, according to these DOJ statistics, the FBI used its Section 215 powers only 21 times. It was a rare, narrowly tailored, and proportionate use of extraordinary powers. Now, 4 years later, we learned from Snowden that Section 215 was used to obtain the call data records of substantially every American, local, domestic, or international. All those records, with a few technical exceptions. It took 12 of the Section 215 orders, it's 12 of the 21, 4 times each year to each of 3 companies, to acquire 1 trillion telephone records. So, 21, 1 trillion. Yes, there were 21 orders. The government did not exactly, quite precisely lie about this, but suppose a teenager admits that she threw a party while you were away and said, well, I only had 21 friends at the house. And it turns out 1 trillion people showed up. She would be so grounded. You would probably feel pretty deceived. And that kind of word game, I would submit, is worse when it's about the boundaries of government power over its citizens. It subverts any claim to an honest public debate. Now, we can't know every secret detail. We can't manage intelligence by plebiscite. But if government starts lying for our own good, then the foundations of democracy are getting shaky. That's why I do what I do. I try to find out and publish information that allows us all to participate participate in fundamental decisions about the power that we entrust to government. So, what do we learn from the NSA archive and from the investigative reporting that those documents enabled? I won't try to cover all the main points, but I will touch on disclosures that are especially relevant to holding our leaders accountable, and relatedly, the ones that have the most impact on the way journalists can do our part of that work. So, a lot of critics of my work have said that most of the Snowden stories are not really about domestic collection at all, and therefore have nothing to do with U.S. privacy. Now, even if you accept that only U.S. persons' privacy matters, and President Obama has disclaimed that view, I believe the critics are factually wrong. That's because the bulk of what the NSA collects does not collect on purpose. So to understand that, you need to know three important terms of art. We've often heard from the government that they're not allowed to target a U.S. person, citizen, and permanent resident, or a U.S. corporation, by the way. They can't target us without a warrant. That is mostly true, though there are exceptions. There's another category, accidental surveillance. They do target, Gellman at wherever.net, thinking that I'm not American, but then they find out I am. In that case, they will, generally speaking, destroy the information that they collected. But then there's the largest category of information that's collected, and this is the one that intelligence officials and political leaders least like to discuss. And that is information that is acquired incidentally. That is to say, they had a legitimate target, but the manner in which they collected information about that target incidentally swept in a whole lot of other people, and not in a way that's unforeseen. They know their technology and they know the way they like to get coverage, and so it is foreseeable to a certainty that they're going to pick up a whole lot of other people in the collection. That has big implications, which I'll get to in a minute. But on this list, as you see from the colors, both targeted and incidental collection are perfectly legitimate, and they get to keep the fruits. So, one of the things that Snowden gave me was a giant pile of actual intercepted information. He wanted me to be able to judge for myself whether it was proportionate, whether it was relevant. That put me in a fairly delicate position because I am now reading through private material of other people, and some of it has to do with targeted individuals for whom there's good reason to target. And I left that story for a year and a half. I put it in the 2R category. Didn't know how I could write about that. But I figured out a way, I think. And the sample size I was looking at was about 160,000 communications. The collection was done using amendments to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, they call it Section 702, which means it's a collection that is made by the NSA on U.S. territory from U.S. pipelines or U.S. storage facilities, but targeted formally at foreign citizens. So it comes from Section 702. It is now further culled, it is further filtered and whittled down by analysts, the sample I got. So they had only the stuff they were actually going to work with. They threw away a lot of junk. And even so, when I went through this, and with the help of a very highly qualified computer scientist, and we worked through who was in the database, or how many separate identities there were, far more than 9 out of 10 of the unique identities in that database were not the targets. They weren't suspected of wrongdoing. They weren't suspected even of relevance to any legitimate foreign intelligence purpose. They just got swept in as if they were a giant fish net, bringing in all those fish. And there's stuff in there, some of it quite easy, but a lot of it is highly guarded by any of our standards. Hundreds of pages in one case of back and forth between an engaged couple about whether they would go through with their marriage and their sex life and their conflicting religious beliefs. It's sort of excruciating to see it. I used small quotations from that only with the permission of the person who was intercepted, and only after determining that from U.S. officials that neither party of that conversation was at this point suspected of relevance to any foreign intelligence purpose. So here's the important thing about that sample, about this figure of 9 out of 10 being not targeted. All that incidentally collected data stays in NSA data source. Countless gigabytes of that. In fact, Congress has asked the Director of National Intelligence how many U.S. persons, how many Americans are in those data sources, in that incidentally collected material. And the answer from Director Clapper is that he can't answer that question because even to look into it would be an invasion of U.S. privacy. So we can't explain how many Americans have had their privacy invaded because it would be an invasion of privacy to look. But because of the way the information is collected, it is a near certainty that a large fraction of us, let's not put too fine a point on it, a large fraction of you are somewhere in there. Not only metadata, not only data about data, but also content. None of these Americans could have been lawfully targeted for collection in the way the intelligence community uses that term. But once you're in there, they get to keep it, and any analyst may search for you by name without a warrant or any legal process. So they can target you when they're searching for their stored data, and there's a whole lot of it. NSA, CIA, and FBI, among others, have access to that database. According to a group called the President's Civil Liberties Oversight Board, the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, appointed by the President. They asked the FBI how many times it has consulted this database and searched for Americans by name. The FBI said it does so sufficiently routinely that it's unable even to keep an account. Now, the interesting thing is that it doesn't have to. There are no statistics required. There's very little oversight of the use of this data once it's in place. There was another presidentially appointed group called the Review Group. It's in the board there, I guess in the group. The President's Review Group on Surveillance and Civil Liberties. Also set up posts had a former acting CIA director on it, former chief of counterterrorism in the White House, a federal judge, a law professor, a privacy advocate. And one of the subjects they addressed is what should be done if the NSA collects your information and then discovers, incidentally, that you're American. So the review group voted unanimously that those communications should be discarded upon detection with narrow exceptions. Here's what the President and the National Security Advisor said about that. Absolutely nothing. They have steadfastly refused to address that recommendation because it would be a fairly fundamental change in the way things are done. So to be clear, you cannot do surveillance on target without getting incidental collection. If you're listening to me, you're listening to the people I'm talking to. But you have big policy decisions about what you do with that extra stuff. And what they're doing right now is giving themselves complete freedom to use it. So, how is it they're getting all this stuff? The NSA is a truly global operation, and it's taking advantage of the fact, shown in this diagram using thickness of lines to represent the volume of traffic, that the United States is the global internet hub and the global telecommunications hub. Communications take the cheapest path and the most efficient path and the fastest path, not necessarily the most direct in terms of the straight line. And so what happened was there was a law back in 1978, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, designed to stop abuses as they were then being reported, that said there are going to be special rules if you're targeting an American or if you're going to be doing surveillance on U.S. territory. Now, the NSA, for years, went to Congress and said, look at this chart, look at these lines. There's a lot of purely foreign traffic passing over U.S. switches, and we need to do something about that. So it came down to two fundamental authorities. There's Spiegel, the 1978 law I just mentioned, There's also an executive order from the president called 12333. And what the NSA and its allies said is FISA is outdated. We have a lot of foreign communications crossing U.S. switches. Therefore, let's relax the rules that have stopped us from collecting on U.S. servers. And Congress passed that law called the FISA Amendments Act. Here's what nobody said. 12333 is also updated because a lot of U.S. communications are now crossing over foreign switches, and therefore the complete freedom, entirely unregulated, that you've had until now to collect on foreign switches, maybe there need to be some rules for that as well. That is to say, if you send an email from row 10 to row 12 in this room, there's an excellent chance that either immediately or sometime soon, a copy of that email will reside in Hong Kong or in Ireland because of the way the global internet works. The email is busted up into packets. It takes multiple routes to its destination. It gets reassembled, and then big companies like Google and Yahoo have a global infrastructure where they have giant data centers, look like fortresses, where they have backups of their whole systems. They also can distribute the load of the servers so that if the server in Chicago is very busy, you might actually get connected to Ireland when you send an email. So the rules have allowed the NSA to presume that anyone collected, any communication collected from any overseas point belongs to a foreigner. And back when those rules were written, that was substantially likely to be true. It is not substantially likely to be true anymore because all of us are global citizens of the internet in that sense. So one program they have, because it's useful to them, they like to know who's talking to who, is they sit on great big foreign switches and they have a collection system which is told anytime you see anything that looks like an address book, scoop that in. Again, they don't have to worry about whose it is because they're allowed to presume it's a foreigner, unless they know specifically otherwise. So it's a little hard to read with small print here, but that number I just circled is 700,000. That's the number of address books collected in the month of August of the year 2013, I believe that was. And I did the math, and 12 times that number is about 80 million address books that year. That is the essence of a discriminate collection. Now, of course, the NSA is not the only one collecting address books. There's Foursquare, Instagram, but at least now that Apple and Android force them to ask permission, you can decline. You don't have that power when it comes to NSA collection. Now, there are a few other forms of bulk collection that we know of that affect us. They use essentially a billing and switching system that cellular phone companies use all over the world, a protocol called SS7, to collect the real-time locations of billions of devices all over the world. So they know where those devices are by their unique identifiers. It turns out that a lot of Americans travel overseas, and the filters aren't perfect when they try to aim primarily for non-North American targets. And so a lot of your cell phone locations are in their databases as well. They were able to collect the telephony content, that is, the voices of an entire nation, which I decided not to publish the name of the nation for complicated reasons in my story in the Washington Post. But it was a nation in which lots of Americans spent time. So again, lots of Americans had the entirety of their voice calls recorded and stored there. Here in the United States, using this Section 702 I mentioned earlier, as amended to the FISA Act, they have a program called Upstream, which sits on big choke points inside the United States and gathers information. And then there's this, which may be, for those who follow this sort of thing, one of the most famous disclosures in the Snowden files, the story I wrote with a guy named Ashkan Sultani. This was called Google Cloud Exploitation. And the arrow shows you a little note, SSL added and removed to your smiley face. Now the internet industry, and Google in particular, took very great exception to the smiley face. It was we gotcha. They figured out that The left part of the diagram is the public internet. And Google was already encrypting its connections from your computer to theirs. So it wasn't easy to surveil. But then it came to a spot called Google front-end server, where the encryption was removed because the rest of the way traveled strictly inside Google's own systems. And those systems traveled on private fiber. Google did not encrypt them at the time because they had no reason to think that it was subject to surveillance. It didn't cross the public internet. And that's where the NSA was tapping in. The NSA was sitting on the pipes between one Google data center in Ireland and another one in Singapore, and helping itself to whatever it liked, despite the fact that it had legal authority in the United States to ask Google for whatever it had a warrant for. This had a very big impact on Silicon Valley, and many of the companies are now encrypting these connections. You hear more and more about HTTPS or SSL, or essentially encrypted connections from your computer to that service, including Facebook, Yahoo, and others. It's because of this story, this disclosure. Now, encryption is something, in fact, privacy in general is something that the NSA regards as a threat to its own model, in which it needs to be able to get access to information it's looking. So we do not now have an NSA or a president, in my view, who want to abuse these powers or use them corruptly. We do have in living memory an FBI director and a president who did. The NSA does not actually want to spy on everyone. What it does want to do is spy on anyone that it needs to spy on. And in order to do that, it does things that have impact on us all. So it defines any form of security or privacy technology, whether it's firewall, underground, VPN, or BGP encryption, as a threat. Now, if your job is espionage, you want to seek out and extinguish that threat. Now, given this, it used to be a whole lot easier. In World War II, if you came across a message that was enciphered by an Enigma machine, it was German war traffic. If it was enciphered by a machine codenamed Purple, it was the Japanese Army or Navy or Air Force. Breaking those ciphers required prodigious effort. But doing so harmed no other competing social interests, at least on our part. These days, we all use encryption for lots of things, whether we know it or not. The whole foundations of online commerce rest on it. Criminals use it, terrorists, also companies, dissidents, charities, and, pardon the expression, journalists. And the NSA simply can't tolerate that. Encryption draws attention. It becomes a target itself. Here, what you're seeing on this slide, and you need all the details, is a primer on how to use the NSA's X-key score system, which is a front end for global collection, to find encrypted email traffic. These are the signatures that you use if you want to find encrypted traffic. It can be targeted in and of itself. Another rule, the NSA can hold encrypted communications that it acquires forever or until they're readable. That's an official exception to the time limits that govern the retention of other communications. So by trying to protect your privacy, as I do often, you make yourself a target for special treatment. They're going to grab that communication and they're going to save it forever until one day they can break it, and maybe one day they will. We know that they try to steal encryption keys and VPN handshakes as they cross the internet. One day they will very likely have quantum computers that can factor primes, which are which is the basis for encryption we've been using up until now. And although we'll probably switch to a better form of encryption then, they'll still have that old pile of my emails with a confidential source, and they'll be able to decrypt it. So the NSA is what some of the security developers called a theoretical global adversary before. There are a number of tests you can take for security that work against almost anybody, but don't work against a global adversary. The NSA is able to do what they call man-in-the-middle attacks, man-on-the-side attacks, and traffic shaping. And essentially what that means is they put themselves in a position to look at or listen to both sides of the conversation without anyone else knowing it. That's by sitting on big intersections around global communications networks. And if there are communications that don't flow through a switch that they control, they have special sort of super duper secret teams called traffic shapers that go out and split off the cable so that it does travel to a place where they can intercept it. So I'm going to try out a joke here, warning. It's a little bit of a geek joke, but I can't tell it at a serious way, right? And so this is how man in the middle works. You have your computer reaches out and says, "Hey Google, I want to check what you do." And the NSA has a little gadget that says, "Hi, I'm Google," and you connect to that, and then that connects to Google using your credentials. And now the NSA is a man in the middle, you go to both sides. So the geek joke says, "Stop now. Raise the issue. Who's there?" And you can ask one of your computer friends to explain that to you. So, what's a journalist to do? We've evolved in our methods. We rely on communications just like everybody else. How do we protect our confidential sources and our notes? It's important to try to make a distinction here. When Director Clapper gave testimony about the worldwide intelligence threat posture a year and a half ago, he referred to Snowden and his co-conspirators. The Inspector General of the NSA, in a speech that was given not long after that, spoke of his collaborators. Now, that would be me, by the way. And these terms have legal meaning. And they have legal implications. And these were vetted testimony. These were a speech and a piece of prepared testimony that had gone around for interagency review. It was not common stainless sort. Now, if reporters are subjects in what they regard as a counterintelligence investigation, then the government interprets its powers to allow it to use national security surveillance on reporters. And that has fairly substantial implications for the way we do business in our country, as the way we're free to do the kind of work that we try to do. So I do things like publish an encryption key, and someone says, "Well, you're a target, I'm not sure that'll work." And the best I can say is, "Sure" is a pretty high standard. One day Google popped up a message on my screen telling me that I've been the subject of attempts by a foreign government power to compromise my account on my computer. And it says, "Click for more information," and it basically says, "Well, floss your teeth, get plenty of rest." It says follow normal good security procedures, which I was already following. Odd things did start happening around my devices. So here is a list of incoming emails. You see, several of them have no sender and a date of 1969, which is day one in Unix speak, and the body is empty and nothing happens when I click on it. These are messages sent to my phone, and it's a known attack vector for malware on phones that's sending certain kinds of messages either as text messages or as emails. Even the Attorney General had looked at it. He's actually just evicted himself of a typical spam phishing thing, but I'm not making this up. I really got this email from his real email address. So did Jack White House and the General Counsel of the Director of National Intelligence. There is now, yesterday, debuted a game on Kickstarter that lets you play the Snowden game. And if you get the NSA side, you get to spy on me. This is part of the introductory video. So I naturally asked for advice, and I turned to a guy who calls himself an information security porn star. He is actually well known in the community and very smart about this stuff. And I asked his advice about how you deal with confidential sources. Here's what he says. He says, first, find someone with secrets and recruit them. Immediately begin a rigorous operational security regimen. Issue your orders for secrets and leaks. Set up signaling for when you're ready to meet. And he helpfully gives a KGB example. And for further reading, he says I might want to see a book called Running a Ring of Spies. Now, none of that bears the least resemblance to journalism. Suppose I go to a conference like this one, and I meet someone interesting. Maybe you're out there in the audience right now. Maybe we get to be talking about something innocuous or relevant to both of our lines of work, but clearly on the safe side of the line. I might want to talk to you again. But if we finally sit down and have our little meeting, and I start talking about burner phones and PGP keys and contact protocols, I'll be getting way out ahead of myself. I'd be way out ahead of where our relationship stands. It would be insulting, and I'd probably get about as far as this guy would. So what do I do? A lot of things, like air gap the machines that I use for sensitive materials. I physically remove network hardware. I use virtual machines. I keep my everyday equipment on my person so I can trust it. I lock other equipment in good safes. I have subtle and not so subtle intrusion detection measures. And that's glitter nail polish on the access screws to my laptop. I run something called a secure drive, which is an encrypted and anonymous way to get in touch with me, which I highly encourage. It's the first actual technological answer to the first contact problem. How do you reach out to me and tell me that you'd like to talk without leaving a trail? It's gotten to the point that it takes a 1,200-word web page to explain to potential sources how they can get in touch. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not at all sure that any of this is going to work. I've concluded that no individual, even someone who takes way too much time and trouble to protect himself, is capable of defending against the most sophisticated and determined kind of surveillance. And that's why we need to have a conversation socially, nationally, globally, about where we want to draw these lines. So you have had, since the Snowden release, you've had Google and Yahoo and Facebook, as I said, they've turned on encryption by default for all of your connections today. It used to be that if you did a search or on Bing from Microsoft, it would travel over the open internet, and so that everybody standing between you and the Bing servers could see what you were searching for. And it might be something you weren't especially eager to have other people know that you were searching for. These days, it's unencrypted. There have been lawsuits that have been made possible by the Snowden disclosures. The principal means of defense against lawsuits like this before that were that the person bringing suit didn't have standing because he or she couldn't prove that the thing was happening. Now they can prove it, and so a lot more cases are queuing up to decide on the merits. Congress can have debates not only in closed committees about where the lines should be. And as far as the rest of us, I'm getting most of my philosophy from a T-shirt and a fortune cookie. T-shirt. And a fortune cookie, no joke, I got this one at my local Chinese place a few weeks after the Snowden story broke. It is now in frame. Thank you. Have at me with questions and drop me a line sometime.
So Bart generously offered to take questions, at the risk of us being here all night. What I'd like to do is, we're going to take some questions now. Please come and approach the mics to ask your question because we are recording this. Thank you, Lena. I'd ask you to keep your questions brief and to the point. But if you'd like to come and ask questions, please come down here. Now, we'll run for about 20 minutes, and then I'll make a judgment if we're going to continue. Please.
Knowing what you know, do you use credit cards? How do you pay your cell phone bill each month? Do you physically walk down with cash to the place? How do you live your normal life?
I'm not living an accused of living a very normal life. So easy to find, easy to contact, wants to be able to work quickly, wants to be able to produce on deadline. I'm not a daily reporter anymore. The stuff I'm doing, it takes me 20 minutes every morning just to start up. And sure, when I'm thinking about my personal privacy, which I do care about, there are things I pay for with credit cards. There are things I pay for with currency that can't be tracked. Not because I think I can stop the NSA from knowing, but I don't really feel like being in some data broker's database. If the drugstore asks me to input my zip code when I want to buy a pack of gum, I say no, thank you. Turns out that something that seems fairly anonymous to a data scientist is not anonymous at all. With just 5 or 6 or 7 points of information that this guy in the zip code who's white male, in the early 50s, and likes this flavor of bubblegum, in a couple more data points, they can identify me uniquely and then start tracking everything I do. So I'm careful about that sort of thing, and I actually am one of these guys who reads the terms of service. That alone is a huge tax on this.
For the other basis, and what is the takeaway from the Snowden effect? Do we start encrypting everything we have in our own data, or do we see the political force trying to change the long-term representatives would help us? What should the other system do? Should we run our high, or should we become
So here's the thing. I mean, God forbid I was ever in charge of policy. You'd be sorry, and so would I. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. What I think you might want to do, if this interests you, is learn more. Because there are a lot of powerful interests, and I didn't talk that much about private industry. So when Google spends all this time on encrypted communications, a less flattering way of explaining it would be no one gets to spy on our users but us. And so the commercial science collecting a huge amount of value. They will make a case that you don't care. You're happy to make this trade-off of free services. I mean, it's spectacular. You can search for anything. You have remarkably good email. There's a map that shows you satellite images practically anywhere on Earth. And their case is that you're happy to pay for that through data. The problem is that it's an unequal exchange. You have no idea what they're actually collecting. You have no idea what they're doing with it. And when I have run little experiments with people to show them what that is, they find it very creepy. They start opting out of things.
In the presentation that you just gave, you were showing documents that were TSSCI and things like that. Since the Snowden documents started to become published, has the NSA issued a declass order for that? I mean, have they said, okay, it's out there, we admit it, or are they still saying that this is out there?
These documents, by and large, are still classified. And in many cases, if you work for the government, if you have clearance, you're not allowed to go look at them. Even if you're cleared for that department, you're not allowed to go look at them at the Washington Post website because it's not in an official channel. Now, it's perfectly rational for them to say, we're not going to declassify everything that gets leaked because otherwise we're letting somebody else decide what's classified and what's not. But it gets them knotted up in pretty bad knots. For example, from the very first time I talked to them, they know what every detail of every story before it's published. I promised them 48 hours notice at minimum so that they could talk through it. First of all, make sure I have the context right, make sure that the document is accurate. Because it could be an authentic document, and that I understood what it meant. They don't always want to tell me, but they have an opportunity to clear things up. They talked me on a couple of stories because I came to believe that I didn't understand correctly. But I don't want to email them a document, but I'm not yet sure that I feel safe on it. I don't want to talk to them on the phone lines about it. And they have steadfastly refused to give me a secure channel to communicate with them because an unclassified computer can't touch a classified network. And unclassified network can't touch a classified document. And so they handcuff themselves to the point where they would rather have a phone conversation with you, in which they say there are 2 words that rhyme, the 3rd paragraph, and the word that comes after that, these are crazy conversations. One time, they asked me to give them something unencrypted, and I just refused. And they finally sent a message to look it up. But the rules get tangled. They have, by the way, declassified a lot of other things in what they described did for transparency. That Snowden showed, they said that there did need to be more transparency, but he didn't do it the right way. So they now have a website, on Reddit, on Tumblr, that publishes a lot of stuff that has been recently classified.
So the documents that show tonight is
No,
unclassified?
they're classified still.
Thank you.
Hi. You mentioned that some of these online services like Google are beginning to use encryption by default. But at the same time, it seems like the government and intelligence agencies are kind of demonizing encryption. I saw a story recently, just a few weeks ago in Turkey, a couple of journalists, Spice news journalists, were arrested and charged on terrorism charges simply for using Tor network encryption. Do you think there's any risk or possibility of encryption being criminalized in the U.S. or in Europe?
Well, encryption is being criminalized overseas. India has a proposed law, not yet passed, that would forbid the use of encryption keys larger than a certain size, that being the size that India's government does not crack. And disallowing the use of transport layer security, et cetera, for certain kinds of things. The U.S. government has talked a lot about encryption of data in storage. So there's 2 kinds of data they care about. There's the data in motion, data at rest. Stuff as it crosses lines, and then stuff is stored on the iPhone. And if you have iOS 8 or 9 installed on your iPhone, and you set a PIN, which you should, then Apple encrypts that by default. And Apple made a deliberate design decision that it would not be able to open it once you lock it. And that became the sort of the tipping point for a big debate in which the FBI director and the NSA director and others said, you're handing a weapon to terrorists. You're saying that even with a lawful order from a court, we can't get access to that. And that's correct. They can't. There's a lot of history behind this. I mean, our founders, I was going to stick that slide in here, but went over time as it was. Founders used encryption to communicate with one another. We've always been able to take a walk in the field, or read something and burn it, or memorize something and never write it down. A court order gives them the right to demand something, and gives them the right to insist that someone is capable of providing it shall do so. It does not give them the right to know every secret of our heart, or to penetrate any method we might come up with for privacy. And they're getting nowhere with their request and demand that Apple, Google, and others give them about.
Firstly, thank you for all your efforts on this topic. You mentioned a lot of tools that you use to securely communicate with people who are leaking information and such. I was wondering if there was anything that you wish should be improved with the tools, such as ease of use, or any tools you wish existed that we in the engineering community could help contribute to?
That's a lovely conversation. I've had that conversation a lot with engineers who are thinking exactly as you are. I use this giant alphabet soup of security tools, and it takes a lot of my time. It took a lot of time to learn. These were not invented for bubbles. These were for security wizards and engineers and tech people, and I've had to learn them painfully over time. But for ordinary people, and this relates to the last question I got as well, I mean, I would recommend that you do updates every time your software tells you to do so. Lots of times to close security holes. Use a password manager so you don't have to remember complicated passwords. because your dog's name is not offensive. And turn on the default encryption that comes with your device. Apple's called firewall. It's in the system preferences. One click. And then someone takes a computer and can't read it. For me, for more advanced tools, sure, we need a much better standard for email encryption. TCP is hideously hard to use. And it's not as secure as someone's claim because, as you know, it doesn't have something called forward secrecy. That's what I was talking about when I said they can collect all the gobbledygook, and then one day, 10 years from now, they can break the key and they can read it all. There are more modern forms of encryption that have something called forward secrecy, meaning that the key changes with every exchange. And so capturing one key doesn't get you a great big pot. But it's really, it's usability. It's getting normal people in the room with your tool and seeing how they bang their head against it.
Hi, I'm from China, but I'm studying here at Purdue. So back in China, we all know our government is collecting data from us. And here in America, American government, like NSA or something, are also collecting data from American citizens. So the reason why they're collecting, I think, is because anti-terrorism. So if somebody, like, they're preparing for a bomb, we can immediately, if the government is supervising their data, they can easily find they're doing something and they can take action. So if we just don't collect data at all, so how can we find this? What's the balance between data collecting and not collecting data? What's the balance?
So if you think about the interest here, which includes security and also include privacy and liberty and not feeling spied on so that you don't feel restrained in what you're going to say, you could dial back 100 years. Intelligence agencies and law enforcement officials have spent most of their history not having these digital tools. If the FBI wanted to follow you 30 years ago, they put a team on it. And if they wanted 24/7 surveillance, that was probably at least a dozen people. 3 shifts, 4 people, and they had eyes on. And that meant that they had to put some time, they had to put investment and personnel into it. And that's not as efficient as just being able to push some buttons and go to location histories from your cell phone and get it for almost zero marginal cost. But inefficiency is not a bug, as I see it, and as the American constitutional framework was designed. It's a feature. It's if they're going to do something that intrusive, like getting moment by moment coordinates on where you go and who you talk to, they should have a really good reason. They should have to really want it and be willing to devote resources to it. And there's a danger when you make this sort of thing too efficient. And it never has been before. I mean, even with encryption, even with restrictions and rules, they're still in what they call the golden age of surveillance. Golden age of electronic surveillance. There is so much more data out there than ever existed in the world before. If they're locked out of a piece of it, they're still way ahead of where they do
Just curious what you know about what Hillary Clinton did regarding her email server.
See, this is the great temptation of surveillance, right? I mean, if you gave any report the ability to secretly to tap into somebody's email or phone records, a lot of people could convince them, well, I trust me, I'm only going to use it for a really good story, a really important public cause, and no one really has to know, and I won't do anything bad with it. I mean, you can see how people talk themselves into that, and they have really important jobs to do in the security world. So, it's clear that her primary purpose was to protect the secrecy of communications, that she did not want people in the State Department or the White House or the public to have access to it eventually. So she was going to keep personal control. But it's clear that there's zero chance that the security of our personal server would have been in the State Department. And at some point there was an order given to destroy something like half of the emails. We don't know exactly from whom. We don't know exactly how thoroughly it was destroyed, but it appears that the FBI now has the server and has been able to do forensic analysis on it. One thing you should know already is that when you hit erase into trash on your computer, it probably is not making the file go away. It's still with you. Thank you. This will be our last question.
Thank you for coming to Purdue. Towards the end of your talk, you mentioned the tools that we should use. That was part of your talk, and you answered some questions here about that already. And how we need to have a conversation and debate social as far as next steps and what we're going to do with privacy and surveillance and things. And I'm wondering, in addition to the use of these tools and attending these conferences, what can we do? Who can we call or contact, or moving forward Monday morning, what can we do to further the conversation and kind of keep this alive? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. You read about it, and you listen to conference talks, and you'll see people on programs. This one's from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or the ACLU, or someone takes a really different point of view. And see what sounds like it makes sense. Check out the website, talk to the representatives. There